Okay, good evening and good morning for those in Korea and also Asia. And I hope that you are doing well and safe despite all the challenges we have at home and abroad. Especially my thoughts are with the Ukrainian people and those suffering from the war. Okay, I'm Gyuk Shin, Director of Schoenstein, Asia Pacific Research Center, and also Korea program. So this is our first webinar series for Korea program this quarter. And we have two more coming up this quarter. The next one actually is next Tuesday, April 12th, 5 p.m. Pacific time on gender equality in higher education. So hopefully you can join us next week as well. And also we are celebrating 20th anniversary of Korea program this quarter. So on May 19 and 20, we have 2 days event, and we will be announcing details fairly soon. So hopefully you can join us as well. Okay, today I'm very happy to introduce my colleague, Haley Golden, who's working as a research associate for Korea program. And she studied, I believe, biology at Princeton and Korean studies here at Stanford. And then she joined our program last September. So Haley will be introducing our speakers today and also moderating the panel. So once again, welcome to our event, and please enjoy our discussions. Haley?
Great, thank you, Professor Shin. So by way of introducing this panel, I just want to start by pointing to a perhaps obvious, but I think a fascinating reality about the Korean Peninsula, which is that there's this sealed off nation to the north with a regime that really tries as much as possible to prevent outside information and media from coming in. But across the border to the south is a country that is exporting its popular culture and its media as much as it can to the rest of the world. So in today's panel, we're going to really dig into the illicit flow of South Korean popular culture into North Korea. And in the policy world, when it comes to North Korea, there tends to be this focus on nuclear weapons, on Kim Jong-un, and on human rights abuses. But as I'm sure we'll see over the next hour, if we're trying to really understand North Korea, it's also important to understand what's going on at the level of everyday life, and to keep an eye on not just the regime and its weapons, but also in the way that North Korean society is changing. And as Professor Shin said, the Korea program here at Stanford will actually be holding a conference in late May that will center on separately on the topics of North Korea and of the South Korean wave. So this panel today is particularly timely for us in that it combines these two topics. So now I'm delighted to introduce our two panelists for today, Professors Sunny Yoon and Seokyoung Kim. Dr. Sunny Yoon is joining us from Seoul, where she is a professor of media and communication at Hanyang University. Her research has focused on the globalization of Korean media, the interaction of religion and new media, cultural politics, youth culture, and fandom of Korean popular culture. So she's the author of several books, including Communication Technology and Creative Industries, as well as Global Media and Asian Identity, Cultural Hybridity or Cultural Resistance. She's also been a visiting fellow at Yale and Cambridge and a visiting professor at universities in Japan, Taiwan, London, and the US. Dr. Seokyoung Kim joins us from UCLA, where she's a professor of theater and performance studies and also directs the Center for Performance Studies. Her scholarship has won awards and includes books such as Elusive Utopia, Theater, Film, and Everyday Performance in North Korea, as well as K-pop Live, Fans, Idols, and Multimedia Performance. She is currently working on two book projects titled Way Ahead of Squid Game and Millennial North Korea, Forbidden Media and Living Creatively with Surveillance. Her comments on Korean cultural politics have been featured on Billboard, CNN, NPR, and the New York Times. So we will have a Q&A after the speakers give brief presentations. So if you have questions along the way, feel free to drop those in the Q&A box below. And with that, I'm going to ask Professor Yoon to start us off.
So today's panel is Hallyu in Korea. I So I was asked to speak about like 10-15 minutes, which is not very long to elaborate my theme. So I like to start with kind of a very clear-cut yes and no questions. The theme of this panel today was like how widespread Korean popular culture in North Korea. I would say yes. It's very influential. And South Korea contribute to social change in North Korea? I guess yes. It reflecting real changes in everyday lives of the people. The third theme was Korean wave have the contributing to political unrest and change in North Korea. For these questions, I would say no, or let's see, I would say more negative side. And the influence of this pop culture on political change would be more complex. And also the influence is very complex, and this social change in North Korea have double faces, and it can aggravate the peoples who want to change their lives. So I address mainly this third questions in my presentations. The first questions, does Hallyu is widespread in North Korea? I say yes. And I pride myself that I have the first person to discover that South Korean media influence on people in North Korea in academic paper. In my paper that I researched in 2011, I researched on the high school students, like special high school for North Korean defectors. And they say like 60% of the students says they watch Korean media whenever they want. And that was really surprised people because we didn't know until that time the South Korean media is so popular. And later on in 2015, there was another official, it's not by me, but an official survey for all North Korean defector in Hanawan. It says like 85%. And another questions later, another study later on for North Korean people, not defectors, but North Korean people living in North Korea who temporarily work in the border area in China, along the China. They was a study for these people, and their reaction is the same. So it's not only for defectors who are supposed to more inclined to like South Korean or foreign media and culture, but also the ordinary people in North Korean, and they say they all enjoy. So their reaction is they all enjoy South Korean media. So how it happened? We had no like relations, media exchange between South and North Korea. So it's from most people now knows is through 장마당, which means it's market. It started with like illegal street vendor close to border area in border area between North Korea and China, and it's a trading product from and to China. So it's a byproduct of this trade. A lot of those cultural product illegally come to North Korea. So through this Jangmadang trade, the South Korean media has spread all through those people. And we call Jangmadang generation, so market, which means market generation. So young people, we call Jangmadang generation. Jangmadang means like a market generation, which means they have no experience of real communist distribution system, because since the mid-90s, North Korea had a great famine. We call 고난의 행군, a great famine. So North Korean government cannot manage the distribution system for people. So people really had this hunger, like there is no exact statistics, but like over 10% of all population has died because of hunger during this great famine time and onward. So people have to find their food. So they open up this illegal street vendor, which is not allowed by the government, but government a little kind of loosen those inspection because of this situation. So usually women and children become a vendor because men have to work for government with no pay. So most women and children, like they start to be vendor like at the age of 12 and 13s, and like some people like 15s, and they don't go to school and they have to sell things for food. So that's Jangmadang. So through the Jangmadang, this South Korean, not only South Korean, but also like all foreign medias come through. And these days, people, it's not like television signal or like a regular DVD, but people use like USB. So there's like a bunch of foreigners, including South and China and other like Hollywood movies, and they buy through Jangmadang and watch. So influence of South Korean, like the second question, so most people secretly enjoy, I already say 85% at least, or like almost all people enjoy South Korean and Hollywood and foreign media, and especially the influence on young people. So young people like to imitate fashions that they saw in like Korean dramas. And they like imitate the linguistic tones of South Korean like young people, as well as they imitate dance and songs on their gatherings. But of course, it's strictly forbidden, and you have to go to jail if you are caught when you watch this South Korean or the foreign media. But people has a kind of loopholes, so they make it secret, like among only families and friends, and they don't make it public, right? But they often being caught, and they take that risk. But people have some kind of a know-how and says, we can bribe them, right? So look, if local policemen come and they give some money and they get away, and especially boys in my studies, they have no fear. Like girls, they are kind of fear, have fear, but boys has no fear. And one of my interviews says, "Oh, even if it is forbidden, it is idiot if you are going to jail just because you watch the South Korean or foreign pop culture." And these boys are very kind of belligerent, like in North Korean situation. So for boys, it's not really, they don't fear to open, they watch and they follow these dances and songs. And so it's another aspect of kind of male, female discrimination in that, like patriarchal order in North Korean society. And even inspectors, they afraid of these boys because they are very violent. So those inspectors don't really catch boys but girls. That's what interviewee says. My focus is this change. It is certain that North Korean society is changing inside because of this, particularly because of this marketization. But the influence is more complex. So I would say it's a double faces. As I told you, that woman is a breadwinner in North Korea. Men have to work for public job with no pay. So women have to support the family, and women and children are the people who explore this marketization and changing society in North Korea. But ironically, economic role of women are very high in North Korea, but still they take the burden because it's very male chauvinist and patriarchal society in North Korea. And furthermore, as the economy situation is worse and worse because of this sanction and nuclear test, women destined to take the higher risk, and in order to take care, support their family, now they have to cross the border to support the family. And the human trafficking is starting from this point. Even though there's a controversy because we don't really can study the whole population or like right sample from this the North Korean defectors because they don't really want to disclose their identity. But one study says among like 100 North Korean defector in China, and a study says like 75, almost 75% this woman, 75% of this North Korean people who come to China had experience of human trafficking. And in my study, it's a more small ethnographic study. In my study, interviewees says, all women experience this human trafficking when they cross the border. And the study says like 90, the form of this human trafficking is 90% is forced marriage, and 1% of forced labor is multiple answer, and 47, like 5% is forced prostitution. So it's most like forced marriage. So currently, North Korean defectors coming to South Korea are mostly women, and this woman's experience like this human trafficking when they stay in China. So as now we have like 3,000, like 30,000 North Korean defectors, but it is estimated 10 times more North Korean defectors in China, and it is also estimated like a third, 30,000 children born from this forced marriage with this Chinese man. And many North Korean female defectors in South Korea have children born in 3 countries. First in North Korea, they go to China because to take care of their original children, and then they go to China through this human trafficking, and they have children in China, and they have so much difficulty in China, and then again come to South Korea. So this woman had like 3 nation born children, like North Korea, China, South Korea. So it's very, very difficult situation. And this show in the movie and documentary films, I'm not sure you have experienced. You have seen. Did I?
I'm just keeping an eye on the time. I think it's been a little over 15 minutes. So if you want to wrap up.
Okay, so I'll just wrap it up.
Great, thank you.
So it's like a vicious circle of victimization, human trafficking, and then they got into domestic violence in China, and then identity crisis, and then sacrifice themselves. They're like children in 3 nations. So it's very, very difficult for women because their economic role is rising. And also they open up to like foreign media, like South Korean media. They have a dream for like a new kind of life, that they get image from the South Korean media, but they get into this like further victimization of this system. So it is more complex than just this influence, like openness of North Korea would lead to political change or political unrest or resistance of the people against the government. But it is more complex. And also people's reaction is more complex. This North Korean defectors are both critical against North Korea and also South Korea. And they are not really politically motivated. The like ordinary defectors, they say their reason to come to South Korea is economic, not political. That is, I found in my study. So I would say the ideological power is more complex. So North Korea not simple victim of political repression. There seems like 3 layers of ideological power. So like coercion and propaganda of North Korea is only 3rd layer. But in side, even if there's a change, cultural and social change inside of North Korea, still this patriarchalism and nationalism that North Korean regime has based on is still retained in people's mindset and their way of lives. So it's more complex. That's what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. Professor Kim, if you could share your slides.
Thank you all for being here, and thanks to organizers and Professor Shin for enabling this encounter. Although remotely, I'm very excited to share this ongoing research. I'm glad to also go after Professor Yoon because she has really laid out in broad stroke, the cultural, political, and economic background which enabled the massive influx of Korean wave into North Korea. So perhaps that leads me to pay a bit more attention to textual analysis and close reading of certain productions that have gained enormous popularity among North Koreans. So I would like to start out by sharing this paradox that North Korea as a nation and as a people are faced with today. This slogan, keep your feet grounded in your homeland as you turn your eyes towards the world, was introduced across North Korean society in 2009, 2 years before Kim Jong-il passed away. And it just viscerally captures the conundrum that North Korea is faced with in this fast-paced, ever-digitizing world. So how would its people, when they're cut off from the worldwide internet and free access to information, actually turn their eyes towards the world? Despite the draconian state surveillance, North Korean people, however, have managed to find ways to achieve this. And one of the kind of landing point for them was, of course, turning their attention to all kinds of South Korean pop cultural products. But I would say the influence of K-dramas are actually tremendous across different generations. So perhaps I can devote more time to looking closely into why these dramas are popular and what appeals to North Korean viewers, where are the points of identification and perhaps misidentification. So very conveniently for researchers, BBC Korea has done annual survey with some 300 North Korean resettlers in South Korea and asked them what dramas they watched while they were in North Korea. And these iconic classics such as Autumn's Tale, Stairway to Heaven, Boys Over Flowers, My Love from Another Star keep kind of topping the chart in this survey. So I'm going to use these as a launching pad to really think about what makes them appeal, or what are the attractions that really keep North Koreans kind of pay their attention to these. And for those of you who have seen these dramas, you would notice that these are actually chaebol dramas. Many male figures tend to be from this powerful corporate family, falling in love with somebody not of their own background, somebody poor but with heart of gold, but despite all the obstacles, they somehow find love and become happily united, or not. Sometimes it ends in tragedy. So I think it's interesting to kind of put this in a broader context of what North Korea as a society was going through in the new millennium. As Professor Yoon articulated well, that whole Jangmadang culture, the marketplace generation and new mentalities of kind of fending for themselves economically, financially, just to get by, emerging out of this really difficult, long, arduous march, was really changing North Korea in a seismic way. And perhaps this chaebol dramas really teach them the rules of brutal kind of capitalist world. Also, we should kind of think about how these dramas provided escapism with their novelty. I mean, life in North Korea cannot be always easy for many people. So it kind of provides them with a glimpse of life beyond North Korea. And their focus on individual feelings, romance, and love struck them as something quite novel that has not been really articulated in any official North Korean propaganda. And some of them also point out that the exotic variation of South Korean dialect is quite attractive to listen to and sometimes puzzles them. It's the comprehension is there. However, this strange stylistic variations that you find in colloquial South Korean speech that North Koreans cannot quite understand is something that also creates this kind of magnetic attraction that keep them drawn to South Korean dramas. So while I laid out the points of differences on the left side, I would also like to emphasize that actually perhaps what connects South Korean drama world and North Korean viewers are stronger than what divides them. So there is an incredible degree of familiar points such as family-centered life and the importance of class and origin, as we often encounter in these chaebol dramas. So in North Korean society, if Sungbun, your political background is the kind of driving force of determining people's social mobility and their success in life, during Jangmadang period, era, and the rise of marketplace also kind of created huge shift in that somebody with financial capital can actually also accrue political capital through marriage and all kinds of relationship building. So when we think about the first 2 decades of North Korea as a society, it was a society in tremendous flux that was going through all these changes in value system and social relations. So South Korean dramas perhaps provided new rules of the game through very familiar family-centered life, through some exotic and escapish variations and fantasies. So in my view, these are really the forces that made South Korean dramas have longevity despite the dangers that could impose to viewers, as Professor Yoon laid out. But for me, I'm currently writing a book on the propagation of cell phone networks in North Korea and how that impacts media consumption patterns and worldviews. So for me, the particular interesting point here is that South Korean dramas, in a way, display cell phone technologies that are not used in North Korea, but are soon to be introduced and adopted. So in a way, the circulation of certain popular dramas almost become textbook or manuals to showcase how to use certain features of cell phones or cell phone apps that are not yet introduced to North Korea. So a case on point, few examples from the dramas that I quickly illustrated. So this is a scene from Autumn in My Heart, 가을 동화, which was released in 2000 and became widely seen in North Korea in the first half of the millennium. In 2000s, it started appearing in various kind of formats, for like DVD, VCDs, and tapes. Anyways, this is an enormously popular drama among North Koreans. And there is a very peculiar moment in Autumn in My Heart where one of the protagonists, Won Bin, played by Won Bin, is exhibiting something called cell phone kiss. What I mean by that is the character played by Won Bin is making a three-way phone call and pretends that he's using this landline and he's talking to his potential love interest, played by Song Hye-kyo. And he makes this three-way phone call and he collapses this mobile phone and then takes another set and walks towards her to surprise her. So this kind of ways of using cell phone, which was not introduced in North Korea, was shown prior to the actual widespread of cell phones. And if we think about how North Korean resettlers actually send money back to their family members in North Korea, we see that kind of similar cell phone kiss technique is used. So for as many of us know, North Korea economy depends on remittance economy, right? So if you are a defector who settled in South Korea and you still have family members in North Korea, you are oftentimes you send regularly a large sum of money back to North Korean family members. And in order to verify that the money has been received safely, South Korean family member in South Korea makes a phone call to North Korea. But because there isn't a direct phone line established, you have to go through a set of brokers. And usually one broker has a phone registered in China. Second broker has a North Korean domestic kind of network service. And these two brokers physically meet around the border region and they kind of put their cell phones together. So family in South Korea who calls this Chinese phone number can actually hear the voice of a family member in North Korea who calls through this domestic phone line. And although the connection isn't so great, they could actually figure out, what's being communicated. So this kind of cell phone kiss technology was already shown in the drama before cell phones were even widely used in North Korea. Another point to make here is that dramas such as Stairway to Heaven and My Love from Another Star really make cell phones as an extension of the character's subjectivity. So for those of you who remember this, this is 2013, not 2009, that's a typo. You remember this Jeon Ji-eun's character is a Hallyu star and she compulsively shoots selfies and always posts them on social media. And that's her way of existing in the eyes of the public. So cell phone becomes very much an extension of her selfhood. And in Stairway to Heaven, there's a scene where these two lovers are about to break up, but they cannot forget about each other. So this character played by Choi Ji-woo is calling this character played by Kwon Sang-woo, and there's a caller ID is 0000, as if she's trying to kind of erase her presence from his life. So there's this tremendous kind of entanglement between the human subjectivity and how that is extensively expressed through the gadgets. And we see that this has also really influenced how cell phones are seen as objects of conspicuous consumption. If you read Kim Hyun-ho's report on cell phones in North Korea, and how this has become a new marker of this generational divide between those who have and those who don't, those who participate in market economy and those who do not. Another interesting aspect of South Korean dramas is that they kind of show how surveillance works as an actual technology and as a social mechanism to control, your visibility. So again, My Love from Another Star, 2013 to 2014, there is a scene where this rather devious character is directly gazing at the surveillance camera in the elevator. And then the scene cuts into the central room where all these activities within the building is being monitored simultaneously. And I really wonder how scenes like this is communicated to North Koreans who oftentimes really are aware of the fact that whenever they use cell phones, they are aware that they're being surveilled. And during my limited ethnographic research interview with North Korean resettlers, they always had the sense of fear that surveillance is omnipresent and they cannot really freely communicate their minds over cell phones because somebody might be listening. And then when I follow up with a question where asking whether they have actually seen how surveillance works on the other side, none of them could really verify how it works, but they were just aware that this is a society where phone conversations are tapped and they're constantly being watched. And I think that fear is well served. Something that they could actually visualize in South Korean drama is actually pervasive in cell phone kind of technology. So this is on the left, you see here is the Arirang smartphone model that came out in 2017. I mean, technically, it's a very advanced phone, lagging only 1 year behind Samsung Galaxy models. But when you purchase this phone, it comes with this software, which looks like a really cute, benign game, 말하는 곱슬이. It's like a North Korean rendition of Talking Ginger, so it's an online virtual pet. However, one South Korean tech analyst actually wanted to trace signals as to where information is being sent when you use this software on Arirang 151. And he came to a realization that this is actually a spyware that records all the incoming and outgoing phone numbers. And the outgoing phone numbers, incoming phone numbers were sent to this unknown kind of server, the destination that he couldn't quite identify. So yes, the cell phones are prone for surveillance, and sometimes South Korean dramas can really showcase how it could actually look on the other end. So because my time is limited, I would like to kind of wrap this up. So what does this all tell us? Professor, you mentioned this, that this kind of forbidden foreign media is usually shared between close friends and family only. It has to be somebody that you truly can trust. Otherwise, you're taking a huge risk. So what's interesting in this aspect is that it could potentially create a social network based on familial ties and trust, something that could potentially deviate from the existing social kind of context, the forced socialization collective networks that government wants you to kind of participate in. I'll try to wrap this up soon. And what's also interesting for me is that this new alternative social network has to be performed cogently. I don't think it's all that hidden. Otherwise, there won't be any chain of distribution of through which this media can travel. So this is what I mean by living creatively with surveillance. You have to use coded language, such as, oh, so are GG couple, meaning that they are the couple that watches a lot of South Korean dramas, because most South Korean kind of colloquial speech ends with 지, 그랬지, 맞아, 그랬지, things like that. So there's this like development of coded kind of language that's somewhat cogently performed. And as a result, I think we're kind of seeing more diverse kind of society, which deviates from this kind of collectivized premillennial kind of ways of being. So with that note, I will end, and perhaps I can elaborate more during Q&A. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, both of you. So now begins our Q&A portion. So audience members, feel free to ask questions. And while you get your questions ready, I have a few of my own that I can start us off with. Yeah, so I would just love to follow off some of kind of how we've seen this trend develop in the recent, like, past few years. So I'll start by asking, last summer, I think a bunch of news sources, including the New York Times, reported that Kim Jong-un had labeled K-pop, I think it was a vicious cancer, and was really warning his people against K-pop. So I'm kind of interested in your opinions, what you think it is about K-pop, about South Korean media or foreign media that the Kim regime perceives as particularly threatening, and what it's a threat to. And whoever wants to answer first, feel free.
Professor Yoon, I'll go after you.
Okay. So I don't think it's a specific content that is forbidden, but it's as a whole. South Korean media is forbidden by the government. It is called Nalaripum, which means like capitalist delinquent style. So it's a whole like Korean things are very delicate and for a threat to the Kim's regimes, Kim's power. It is understandable because North Korea, the propaganda point is condemn foreign countries and particularly South Korea. They brainwash North Korean people that South Korea is so still now. They claim that South Korea is just so poor and full of homeless people, but the media, of course, shows different things. So the North Korean people really, the government really feel the whole South Korean the media and pop culture is a threat to the regimes. But ironically, it is open secret that people, the government also know young people enjoy it, and themselves, Kim Jong-un and upper class people also enjoy South Korean and foreign media. So it's very ironic.
I think I ended up presenting a bit about this emerging new social network, but I think that's really the key. They don't want such thing to emerge that they cannot control. So if you just look at the Hallyu content, I mean, most of them are harmless entertainment, right? I don't think there is a huge ideological threat to the regime per se, but it's really the kind of people-to-people contact that the regime cannot always detect or control is, I think, way more threatening than the actual, the context of what K-pop is all about and what K-drama is all about. So there's a, yes, so I'll end there.
Yeah, thank you. That's fascinating. I guess fandoms organized wherever. So relatedly, we've seen kind of, particularly with the 2020 law that was enacted that prescribed harsher punishments for people who are distributing and consuming this content. It seems like the regime is cracking down more on this in the past few years. And I'm wondering if you have any insight into why that would be. I mean, is this somehow related to like tightening control in general during the pandemic, or is this that this content has just become more pervasive overall, so they're trying to clamp down? And then also, do you think that these harsher punishments are actually going to deter people from consuming this content, or is it kind of too late for the regime to stamp it out?
So you want to go first, Kim? Or?
Yeah, I could. If you think about how these absolute authoritarian regimes can sustain their power, usually you can do it if people are economically well off, right? I mean, even if there might be a brutal kind of, crackdown on people's freedom, usually the way they sustain their hegemony is through kind of wealth and kind of, increasing betterment of standards of living. Whereas during COVID, maintaining certain economic standards have become very difficult all across the board, especially for North Korea. The conditions of life has really deteriorated due to, just closing of the borders between China and North Korea. And the recent reports show that inflation is out of control in North Korea as well. Everything has become so much more expensive, and we can easily imagine why that is, because this kind of, official, unofficial kind of border trade has really subsided due to kind of lockdown measures. So I think it has a lot to do with pandemic and its deteriorating conditions of life. We see it everywhere, but you can imagine what places like North Korea would be. So I think the pervasiveness of it is something that is, I think, too late to kind of uproot. I think it has reached a turning point where there's not much that the region can do. And, you know, nobody really knows what's really going on in North Korea. I mean, people who claim that they know what they're saying might be delusional. So I say this with a bit of caution, but I think its pervasiveness can be actually proven by the draconian measures that North Korea is imposing top down. So, yeah.
Yes, I'd like to add that the Holly's questions is, I think the point is that Kim Jong-un has harsh punishment would deter North Korean from watching South Korean content. I say no. Not only the North Korean government, like from time to time, make harsher punishment, but always they had harsh punishment. And in my studies, my interviewees have experienced like public executions because some people, like North Korean people, are caught during they watch Korean media, but still North Korean people, they take a risk and watch it. Like for us, like that, just other people in other nations couldn't understand like what's the big deal to watch South Korean media and enjoy pop culture, to take their life, to risk their lives. But for North Korean, I think they think they know how to get away. Like bribing is very pervasive. This also disclosed the problem with the North Korean political system that is always already breakdown. So North Korean people seems exactly know they can bribe local policemen, but they cannot bribe CIA people, like from central agency. So they share the how to get away, and also North Korean societies as a whole, it's very very totalitarian, and they are not only watching this media, but also like everything, like the Kim says, North Korean people imitate the South Korean linguistic accent. That is also called, right? Like in the street, the policemen say, if you speak in South Korean tone, then you're arrested. So like everything. One of my the interviewee's father went to political jail because he used a telephone to a person in the US, like for 15 years. So everything is risky in North Korean society, and consuming foreign media is one of them. So it's like I don't think that this punishment would deter North Korean from consuming foreign or South Korean media.
Thank you. Here's a question about kind of more recent South Korean political events. How do you see the incoming Yoon administration, President Yoon Suk-yeol, who's just elected in South Korea, dealing with the anti-leaflet law, and if the new government will repeal or revise the law to allow activists and others to send outside information into North Korea?
Professor Yoon, this is for you, because I really haven't been following the recent elections so closely.
What was the question again? I was a little...
President Yoon Suk-yeol, how do you see his administration dealing with the anti-leaflet law, the law saying that you can't send leaflets across the border to North Korea? Do you think the Yoon administration will repeal or revise it?
I don't think I don't remember very well, but Yoon Suk-yeol has he from Conservative Party, and he has a stronger position against North Korean in terms of like military threat. But I don't think he mentions about this leaflet or North Korean human rights issues yet. So I cannot tell you.
Okay. I guess here's like a more kind of fun question. So some of the more recent global hits in terms of South Korean TV have been Parasite, Squid Game, both of which offer kind of a very negative view of South Korean society and of capitalism more generally. So in your research, have you come across any insights into North Korean citizens' reactions to these, or do you have any thoughts on how they might be received? And I'll also add in shows like Crash Landing on You that actually cover North Korea and take place in North Korea. How do North Koreans react to these?
I mean, we know how the government reacted, right? Such
Right.
a viscerally negative way. But I think the best we can do to have some sense of how North Koreans might have reacted to them is to really see how the resettlers kind of process these things. And I think there are all kinds of ways. I think it's very discursive. On the one hand, I mean, I've been very curious about this myself. So whenever I had a chance to interview, I asked about this more recent success of South Korean cultural, artifacts. And on the one hand, I think these, productions that you mentioned, Parasite, Squid Game, Crash Landing on You, especially the first two, deal with very dire consequences of this like brutal, almost dog-eat-dog kind of capitalist world. And that really, in a way, is too much to identify with, because I mean, as I showed in my previous slide, I mean, one of the attraction point is that there is a point to escape to. While some aspects of this world is familiar, you can understand the language and there's importance of family and all that. It's a kind of different world that you want to escape to by forgetting your harsh circumstances, right? Whereas these productions such as Parasite and Squid Game actually draw you deeper into that harsh reality with their own version of realism. So in a way, I think there is kind of less attraction towards these globally successful South Korean productions. When it comes to Crash Landing on You, there is actually, many resettlers have voiced their opinion about them. I think generally speaking, they're very satisfied with the realities of set design. I mean, the production team did research and involved many resettler as their actor and director, and they did really do some research to create the realistic kind of visual image of North Korean marketplace and village. At the same time, this kind of people's background, Songbun in North Korea, and how those kind of traditional political elites might forge ties with economic elites, such as that South Korean woman who is a rich chaebol, kind of rings a bell of truth for many of them. So I think there are all kinds of ways to access that. But I think generally speaking, if I have to pick side, I think Crash Landing on You might be better received in North Korea, given the factors that make South Korean dramas popular there.
I have no study about this Parasite and Squid Game, but my guess is this two recent the recent one are not really watched by North Korean because of the pandemic. So North Korea not really on demand, like a VOD kind of watching the media. They just get this like the content in the US, in the USB from China, but because of this pandemic situations, not many comes from North, like China, and Changmadang is really shrink, that make people more difficult. So I don't think a Parasite and Squid Game have watched by many North Korean people, but North Korean government had a propaganda that Squid Game show the difficult situation of South Korean people, right? South Korean society. But and also Crash Landing on You, the North Korean are very unhappy with this show because the drama illustrate the hungry people in children in Changmadang and rotten politicians in the drama, which is not really the point of the drama. But my guess is that ordinary North Korean people see this drama differently. I think it's mainly like as Professor Kim demonstrate those dramas that North Korean and also other like Asian countries like is like Cinderella drama, like a humble woman married to like chaebol billionaire, or humble man married to billionaire woman. Like Crash Landing is something like this, like typical Korean like Hallyu drama, which attract the North Korean or other Asian audience. But my point is those South Korean content is also patriarchism, based on patriarchism, and which push this North Korean woman had a Cinderella dream and escape from the reality and take the higher risk to on a like new life, and that push them in more desperate situations, as I told you in my presentation.
Great, thank you. I know we're at time, but I'm wondering if we can quickly answer one more interesting sort of comparative question. So one concern about the influence of K-pop on the part of the Chinese government, PRC, has to do with issues of masculinity, that basically Korean men as portrayed in K-pop and K-dramas are not masculine enough and threaten Chinese notions of masculinity. I wonder if there is any similar concern in North Korea.
I think that's a very reasonable kind of take on it, because as Professor Yoon mentioned many times, there's a great sense of gender divide in a strict hierarchical sense, and it's not a society where gender fluidity or free expressions of gender bending is allowed at all. I mean, even for even given that as a background, I mean, too much expressions of femininity is always discouraged, right? Young women cannot really put too much makeup or accessorize or wear outlandish fashion for that reason. So it's a very kind of oppressive society in terms of expressions of any non-normative sexuality. And the fluid masculine expressions that we sometimes find in K-pop idols could be a real red flag in that sense.
I'd like to add that the North Korean boys, males, are very male centric, very masculine, like further masculine, like sometimes violent, right? But still, these young boys, they imitate this K-pop dancing and songs in their party. I heard their experience in my study, ethnographic studies. I guess this audiences, the consumer have diverse motivations. In a sense, this K-pop stars look feminine, like boy bands look feminine. But these boys, these North Korean boys, they have other motivations like freedom, right? Like the dancing, the hip hops, and shows this like a free spirits, and then they really desire this, even though this looking is quite different from them. So it's more like complex motivation is involved in consuming North Korea, in consuming South Korean pop culture. And yes, I heard from my interviewees that K-pop is very popular among young people in North Korea.
Great. Well, we're past time, so thank you both so much for your time. This has been fascinating, and I think we'll all be keeping an eye on how this develops in the future. Thank you.